Before we dive in, it's important to state that this presentation is for informational and educational purposes only. The strategies discussed are based on case studies from professional poker and should not be considered financial advice. Gambling involves significant risk. Please play responsibly and be aware of the laws in your jurisdiction. The year is 2003. The setting: Binion's Horseshoe Casino in Las Vegas. The air is thick with tension, cigar smoke, and the weight of $7 million. It's the final table of the World Series of Poker main event, the Super Bowl of the poker world. We're down to the final two players. In one corner you have Sammy Farha, a legend of the game, a high-stakes professional impeccably dressed, a cool, unlit cigarette dangling from his lips. He's a shark who has navigated these dangerous waters his entire life. In the other corner you have Chris Moneymaker. And yes, that's his real name. He's an amateur accountant from Tennessee. He won his $10,000 seat into this tournament through a $39 online satellite game. He looks out of place wearing a pair of cheap sunglasses and a nervous smile. He is the ultimate underdog, the everyman from Middle America who somehow found himself on the biggest stage in poker. And then the hand happens. The one that would change poker forever. The board shows a mix of cards, nothing too scary. Sammy Farha looks down at his hand and sees a pair of nines. A solid hand. He bets. Moneymaker, sitting on a mountain of chips, stares back at him. He glances at his own cards. He has absolutely nothing. King high. A complete airball. In the world of poker, his hand is worthless. Logically, he should fold. He should give up the pot, wait for a better spot, and live to fight another day. But Moneymaker doesn't fold. Instead, he takes a deep breath and pushes his entire stack of chips into the middle. All in. The room goes silent. Farha is stunned. He looks at Moneymaker, trying to bore a hole through his soul with his eyes. He's trying to find a crack, a twitch, any sign of weakness. But Moneymaker is a statue. Farha starts talking to him, trying to coax information out. You got a pair? You got a straight? Moneymaker says nothing. For minutes that feel like hours, Farha agonizes. Every instinct, every fiber of his professional being is screaming that this amateur from Tennessee must have a monster hand to make such a bold move. It's the only thing that makes sense. Finally defeated, Farha folds his winning hand. The crowd explodes. Moneymaker, with nothing but nerve, had just pulled off what many now call the bluff of the century. He went on to win the whole tournament, and his incredible story ignited the American poker boom, inspiring millions to believe that they too could take on the pros. How did he do it? How did an amateur with a losing hand beat a seasoned professional holding the winner? It wasn't the cards. It was psychology. He sold a story. He understood that in poker, you don't play the cards you're dealt. You play the person sitting across from you. And that is exactly what this video is about. We are going to deconstruct the 5 most powerful psychological tricks that professional players use in high-stakes US tournaments. These aren't just about keeping a poker face. This is about sophisticated mental warfare, techniques designed to manipulate perception, control the flow of information, and ultimately, get inside your opponent's head. And the value here goes far beyond the felt table. Understanding these principles can give you an edge in a salary negotiation, in a business deal, or in any situation where you need to read people and influence outcomes. We're going to peel back the curtain and show you how the best players in the world weaponize the human mind. The first and arguably most fundamental psychological weapon is a concept known as the leveling war. This sounds complex, but it's actually a simple framework for understanding the depth of thought in a competitive situation. It's about thinking about what your opponent is thinking about what you're thinking. Let's break it down into levels. Level 0 thinking is the absolute baseline. It's when a player is only thinking about their own hand. I have a pair of aces. That's a great hand. This is where everyone starts. There's no consideration for the opponent, the situation, or anything else. It's pure self-focus. Level 1 thinking is the first strategic leap. This is when you start thinking, what does my opponent have? You're no longer just looking at your own 2 cards. You're trying to put your opponent on a range of possible hands based on their actions, their position, and the community cards on the board. This is the foundation of basic solid poker strategy. But the pros don't live on level 1. They live on level 2, 3, and beyond. Level 2 thinking is where the real mind games begin. At this level, you're asking, what does my opponent think I have? You're now considering your own image at the table. Have you been playing aggressively? Have you been playing tight and conservative? You use this image to tell a story. If everyone thinks you're a rock who only plays premium hands, you can use that image to bluff more effectively, because when you bet, they'll believe you. You are actively manipulating their perception of your hand. Level 3 thinking goes even deeper. Here you're asking, what does my opponent think I think they have? This is the metagame. This is where you're anticipating their attempt to read you. You're trying to stay one step ahead of their own analysis. Let's make this real with an analogy we can all understand. A simple game of rock, paper, scissors. If you're playing against a child, you might notice they always throw rock. That's level 0. To beat them, you just throw paper every time. That's level 1 thinking. But what if you're playing against a smart opponent? They might assume you've noticed their tendency to throw rock, so they'll expect you to throw paper. To counter your paper, they'll throw scissors. That's level 2 thinking. But if you anticipate that, you would know their scissors is coming, so you would throw rock to beat them. That's level 3 thinking. You're playing the player, not the game. Now let's apply this to a real poker hand you might see at a tournament in Atlantic City. Imagine you're dealt pocket kings. A fantastic hand. You make a standard bet. One opponent calls you. The flop comes out. Ace 7-2. An ace on the board is a scare card for your kings. You bet again, trying to represent that you have an ace. Your opponent just calls. The turn is a blank card. You bet again, continuing your story that you have the ace. Now, your opponent suddenly raises you. What do? A level 1 thinker says, he must have an ace. The ace on the flop helped him. My kings are no good. I should fold. A level 2 thinker says, wait a minute. He knows that I know that the ace is a scare card. He knows I'm worried about it. What if he doesn't have an ace at all? What if he's bluffing? Using that ace on the board to represent a hand he doesn't have, trying to push me off my strong pair. This player is now thinking about what their opponent thinks they have, a good but vulnerable hand like kings or queens. So, the level 2 thinker might decide to call the bet, sniffing out the bluff. But a level 3 thinker, a true pro, goes even further. They think, okay, he knows that I know that he might be bluffing on this scary board. He knows I'm a good enough player to consider calling him down. So, what if his raise isn't a simple bluff? What if he actually has the ace, and he's making a raise that is designed to look like a bluff because he knows I'm smart enough to try and hero call him? He's using my own thought process against me. This is the dizzying multi-layered thinking that separates the amateurs from the elite. Players like Phil Ivey, one of the most feared players in US poker history, are masters of the leveling war. They are constantly assessing what level their opponent is thinking on and making sure they are operating on one level higher. It's a constant, fluid battle of wits. They aren't just playing the odds, they are playing the person. Understanding this concept is the first and most critical step to grasping the deep psychological complexity of high-level poker. It's the foundation upon which all other mental tricks are built. And the first and perhaps most diabolical of these tricks is the art of the false tell. Now most people have heard of a tell. It's that classic movie trope, the villain's eye twitches when he's bluffing, or the hero subtly licks his lips when he has a strong hand. In reality, tells are often far more subtle. A slight change in breathing, the way a player stacks their chips, a brief fleeting glance at their stack. Observant players spend years training themselves to spot these tiny, involuntary cracks in their opponent's armor. But what if the crack isn't a crack at all? What if it's a doorway intentionally left open, leading directly into a trap? That is the essence of the false tell. It's not about hiding your tells. It's about manufacturing a tell, nurturing it, and then using it as a weapon. It's a piece of psychological theater, performed on the biggest stages in the United States, from the Bellagio in Las Vegas to the Borgata in Atlantic City. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine the final table of the World Series of Poker main event. The lights are blinding, the cameras are everywhere, and millions of dollars hang in the balance with every single decision. At the table is a player we'll call the architect. He's a quiet, unassuming player, known for his methodical, almost robotic style. Across from him sits the analyst, a young, aggressive genius who prides himself on his ability to read people. The analyst believes poker is a game of information, and he's a master at collecting it. For the first few hours of play, the architect establishes a pattern. It's almost imperceptible. Every time he has a marginal hand, a draw, or a complete bluff, every time he is vulnerable, he executes a tiny specific ritual. After he makes his bet, he reaches for his water bottle, unscrews the cap, and takes a small, deliberate sip. Then he screws the cap back on, placing the bottle back in the exact same spot. He does this when he bets with a flush draw. He does it when he's trying to steal the blinds with nothing. The analyst, being the sharp player he is, notices. First, it's just a blip on his radar. But then it happens again. And again. He starts to connect the dots. The architect sips water when he's weak. He mentally files this away, a golden piece of information. To test his theory, the analyst starts re-raising the architect every time he sees the water bottle routine. And it works. The architect folds. A small pot goes to the analyst. An hour later it happens again. The architect bets, sips his water, the analyst raises, the architect folds. The analyst feels a surge of confidence. He's cracked the code. He's found the key to this quiet robotic player. He feels like he's in control. This is the most critical phase of the false tell, reinforcement. The architect is conditioning his opponent. He's willing to lose a few small battles, to sacrifice a few $1,000 pots, in order to set up the perfect ambush for the multi-million-dollar war. He is feeding the analyst's ego, making him feel like the smartest person at the table. He's not just building a trap. He's building his opponent's confidence to walk right into it. Then the hand comes. It's the kind of hand that defines careers. The architect is dealt pocket aces, the best possible starting hand in no-limit Holdem. Another player raises and the architect just smooth calls, hiding the strength of his hand. The analyst, holding a strong but second-best hand like ace-king, also calls. The flop comes down ace-king and a 7 of different suits. It's a dream for both players. The architect has hit the top set 3 aces. It's a near-invincible hand. The analyst has hit top 2 pair. Aces and kings. A monster hand in its own right, one that will be almost impossible for him to fold. The betting begins. It's cautious at first. The initial player bets, the architect raises, and the analyst, seeing the board, re-raises. The initial player folds. Now it's just the two of them, the architect and the analyst. The pot is already enormous. The turn card is a blank, a meaningless 2 of clubs. It changes nothing. This is the moment. The architect knows the analyst has a very strong hand. He also knows that the analyst believes he has him figured out. So the architect pushes a huge stack of chips into the middle. A bet so large it's designed to look like a desperate bluff, an attempt to buy the pot. And then he does it. He calmly reaches for his water bottle. He unscrews the cap. He takes that same small deliberate sip. Across the table, you can almost see the electricity fire in the analyst's brain. All of his observations, all of his carefully collected data, scream one thing: bluff. The water bottle. It's the sign. The tell he's been exploiting all night. His mind races, filled with confirmation bias. He sees the huge bet not as a sign of strength, but as a sign of desperation from a player who is weak. He sees the water bottle sip as the final definitive clue that his read is correct. He feels that surge of ego, that feeling of, I knew it. I've got him. He looks at the architect, trying to find any other sign, but all he sees is the calm, robotic demeanor he's seen all night. The only information he trusts is the tell. The false tell. I'm all in, the analyst declares, pushing his entire mountain of chips into the middle. The architect snap calls, before the analyst's chips have even settled. He turns over his pocket aces. The table erupts. The analyst's face goes pale. He stares at the board, then at the architect's hand, then back at the now innocent-looking water bottle. He hasn't just been beaten by the cards. He has been psychologically dismantled. The information he thought was his greatest weapon was, in fact, the weapon used against him. The architect had constructed an entire narrative over hours of play, all leading to this one devastating moment. This is the power of the false tell. It preys on one of the most fundamental human desires in a competitive environment: the desire for certainty. Poker is a game of incomplete information. Players are constantly searching for any edge, any piece of data that can reduce the uncertainty. A reliable tell feels like a cheat code. By manufacturing that cheat code, a pro player can manipulate their opponent's decision-making process at the deepest level. It's an exploitation of what psychologists call confirmation bias. The analyst wanted to believe he was a better reader of people than the architect, so he actively sought out and overvalued information that confirmed this belief, the water bottle tell, while ignoring the information that contradicted it, the sheer size of the bet. The architect didn't just win a pot. He exploited a flaw in human cognition. This isn't about just having one move. A true professional might have 3 or 4 of these false tells they can deploy. Maybe they'll shake their leg when they have a monster hand. hoping an opponent misinterprets it as nervous energy. Maybe they'll engage in friendly chatter only when they're bluffing, to put their opponent at ease. Each one is a carefully crafted performance, a story told without words. The poker table then is not just a field of battle, it's a stage. And the chips are not just currency. They are props in a grand deception. The best players aren't just calculating odds. They are scripting narratives, directing their opponent's attention, and building a world where the only thing that's real is the story they want you to believe. And once you believe it, it's already too late. This level of mental warfare is what separates the good players from the legends of the game. It's a stark reminder that in poker, the most dangerous hand isn't the one you can see. It's the one being played inside your opponent's head. So how do you become the author of the story playing out in their mind? How do you script their doubt, direct their fear, and write a final chapter where they hand you all their chips? This brings us to our third devastating psychological trick, the art of the narrative bet. This isn't about a single clever bluff. Amateurs bluff. Professionals construct a narrative. From the very first card dealt, they are telling a story with their chips. Every check, every bet, every raise is a sentence in that story. The goal is to make the story so compelling, so believable, that by the river, your opponent is convinced it's non-fiction, even when it's a complete fabrication. Let's put you at the final table of a major US tournament. The lights are hot, the cameras are on you, and the prize money is life-changing. You're up against a tough, aggressive player. We'll call him the Bulldog, who has been bullying the table. You look down at 7-8 of hearts. Pretty hand, but not a powerhouse. The Bulldog is in the big blind. You're on the button, the best position at the table. You decide to open the first chapter of your story. You put in a standard raise. The story so far is simple. I have a playable hand in a good position. The Bulldog, defending his blind, just calls. The flop comes down. King of hearts, 9 of spades, 6 of hearts. This is a monster flop for you. You don't have a made hand yet, but you have a flush draw and an open-ended straight draw. You have a massive number of cards that can give you the winning hand. The Bulldog, first to act, bets out. This is where an amateur makes a mistake. An amateur, excited by their draw, might raise here. They'd be screaming, "I'm on a draw. I'm trying to push you out." But that's not a story. It's a spoiler. You, the professional, just call. Your action adds a subtle, crucial sentence to the narrative. It says, that king might have hit me. Or maybe I have a smaller pair. Or yes, maybe a draw. I'm interested, but you're in charge for now. You are planting seeds of possibilities in the Bulldog's mind, but you're keeping the story vague and mysterious. You're letting him believe he's the protagonist. The turn card is the 2 of clubs. A complete brick. It helps nobody. It's a blank page in the story. And now the Bulldog bets again. He's trying to get value from what he likely perceives to be a weaker king or a stubborn pair. He believes he's still in control of the hand. This is the moment. This is where you hijack the narrative. You don't just call. You don't fold. You raise. Think about the psychological shockwave this sends across the table. Everything about this move contradicts the story up to this point. Why would you suddenly show so much aggression on a completely blank card? The Bulldog's mind starts racing. Wait. If they had a draw, they would have raised on the flop, or they wouldn't be raising now on a card that missed every possible draw. The 2 of clubs changes nothing. So, they must not have a draw. What do they have? They just called on the flop. And now they're raising on the turn? They were trapping me. They must have a king with a good kicker, or maybe they flopped 2 pair. They were slow playing me the whole time. You see what happened? With one perfectly timed bet, you erased the story the Bulldog was telling himself and replaced it with a new one, your asterisk story. A story of overwhelming strength. A story in which he has walked right into your trap. The confidence he had just seconds ago evaporates. His strong hand now feels frighteningly vulnerable. The Bulldog, confused and now afraid you have a monster, just calls your raise, hoping to get to the end of the hand cheaply. The river card is the 4 of spades. Another meaningless card. You have nothing. 7 high. A hand that couldn't beat anything. The Bulldog, completely stripped of his aggression by your turn raise, now checks. He has surrendered control of the narrative. He is now a reader, not a writer. And now you deliver the final devastating chapter. You slide a massive stack of chips into the middle. A bet so large it puts the Bulldog's entire tournament life at risk. The story is now complete. The narrative you've crafted is crystal clear. I flopped a monster. I let you bet on the flop to keep you in the pot. I showed my strength on the turn to build the pot. And now on the river, I am here to collect everything you have. The bulldog squirms. He looks at his cards. He looks at you. He replays the story of the hand in his head, the story you so carefully wrote for him. Every piece fits. Your pre-flop raise. Your smooth call on the flop. Your shocking raise on the turn. And now this terrifying river bet. It all points to one conclusion. He is beat. He throws his cards into the muck. He folded the winning hand. You drag a massive pot. A pot won not by cards, but by superior storytelling. This works because of a principle known as cognitive commitment. Humans have a deep-seated need for their world to make sense. We want stories to have a logical progression. When a pro player's betting pattern tells a consistent story, an opponent's brain will work overtime to make it fit, even if it means ignoring other possibilities. The turn raise was the plot twist that forced the bulldog to reevaluate the entire story up to that point. He committed to the most plausible new narrative you presented, that you were trapping him with a monster hand. Once he committed to that belief, the river bet was just the logical conclusion, and folding became his only perceived option to escape the trap. This isn't just about a single hand either. Pros build these narratives over hours, even days. A player might play conservatively for 5 straight hours, folding mediocre hands, showing down only premium cards. They are establishing a character, the tight, cautious player. This is the setup. Then in one massive pot they'll run a huge bluff. Because they've spent hours building a believable character, their bluff, their fictional story, is suddenly perceived as fact. Their opponents think, this guy never bluffs. He must have it. They've been conditioned to believe the story. This deep level of strategic deception, of scripting an opponent's thought process, is a huge leap from simply playing your own cards. It's about playing the player, their expectations, and the very story of the game itself. But what happens when the story becomes too complex? Or when your opponent is just as skilled at manipulating the narrative? What do you do when you can't get a read, when every action feels like a potential lie? That's when pros turn to a completely different kind of psychological weapon, one that relies not on creating a story, but on erasing it entirely. It's about becoming a blank slate, a ghost at the table, and it's where we're going next. This strategy is called the blank canvas technique, and it's the polar opposite of telling a story. Instead of weaving a complex narrative to mislead your opponents, you do something far more unnerving. You give them absolutely nothing. You become a void, a black hole of information at the center of the table. To understand why this is so devastatingly effective, you have to understand a fundamental truth about the human brain. We are meaning-making machines. We are hardwired to look for patterns, to connect dots, to find a narrative in everything we see. When we see a cloudy sky, we predict rain. When a coworker is unusually quiet, we assume something is wrong. We cannot stand a vacuum of information. Our mind will rush to fill it, often with our own fears, assumptions, and insecurities. The pro who masters the blank canvas technique weaponizes this human instinct. They don't just put on a poker face. That's amateur hour. A poker face is about suppressing emotion. The blank canvas is about erasing process. It's a systematic neutralization of every channel through which a human being communicates intent. The timing of their bets, the way they stack their chips, their posture, their breathing, the direction of their gaze, every single variable is standardized. It becomes a ritual. Whether they are holding the best possible hand or are running the bluff of their life, the performance is identical. They give you no patterns to analyze, no story to follow, no emotional breadcrumbs to lead you to the truth. They force your pattern-seeking brain into a state of cognitive starvation. And a starving brain makes mistakes, starts seeing ghosts. It projects narratives onto the void. He must be strong, he's so calm. He must be bluffing. Nobody can be that calm with a big hand. You end up playing against a reflection of your own psychology, and that is a battle you are almost destined to lose. There is perhaps no greater master of this art in the modern era of poker than Phil Ivey. Watching Ivey at a final table is like watching a panther hunt in the dark. There is an unnerving stillness, an economy of motion that is both terrifying and mesmerizing. His opponents, some of the best players in the world, visibly crumble under the pressure of his silence. A legendary example of this took place during a high-stakes cash game, broadcast for the world to see. Ivey was in a massive pot against another pro, Tom Dwan. The board was complicated, and Ivey decided to run a colossal bluff, betting an amount that represented a significant chunk of both of their stacks. Tom Dwan, a genius in his own right, went into the tank. He stared at Ivy, searching. He was looking for the telltale signs that every poker player hunts for. A pulsating vein in the neck. A slight tremor in the hand pushing the chips forward. A shallow breath. A darting of the eyes towards the exit. He was looking for a crack in the dam, any tiny leak of information that would tell him what Ivy was thinking. And he found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Ivy sat there, motionless, his gaze fixed on a single point on the felt. He didn't blink. He didn't shift his weight. His breathing was slow and rhythmic. He was a statue. You could see the agony on Dwan's face. His highly analytical brain was being fed zero data. He started talking, trying to coax a reaction. "You got it, Phil? You got the nuts?" he asked. Ivy's expression didn't change. He said nothing. Dwan, deprived of any external information, was forced to turn inward. He had to rely solely on the math, the betting patterns, and his gut. But his gut was screaming at him that something was wrong. This stillness, this absolute lack of information, felt like a trap. The human mind interprets a total void not as an absence of information, but as a sign of supreme confidence. After minutes of torturous deliberation, Dwan folded what turned out to be the winning hand. Ivy, without a word, without a smirk, simply raked in the mountain of chips. He didn't show his cards. He didn't give Dwan the satisfaction of knowing. He just collected the pot and maintained the void, leaving Dwan to question his own sanity. That is the power of the blank canvas. So how do players achieve this level of control? It's a discipline forged over thousands of hours. First, they ritualize their actions. They develop a specific, repeatable set of motions for every single decision. When they look at their cards, they do it the same way every time for the same duration. When they bet, they grab the chips from the same part of their stack with the same hand and push them forward with the same fluid motion. This removes any tells associated with physical action. A player who fumbles with chips when nervous or slams them down when confident is giving away the whole game. The blank canvas pro eliminates this entire category of information. Second is verbal discipline. They understand that every word spoken at the table is a potential data point for their opponents. So they either remain completely silent, or they use what's called speech play, that is deliberately meaningless. They'll respond to questions with vague, non-committal answers. Could be, maybe, you'll have to pay to find out. The goal is to make their words as uninformative as their actions. It adds another layer of fog for the opponent to navigate. And finally, the most difficult part, emotional and physiological regulation. This is where it goes beyond simple acting. Pros practice mindfulness and breathing techniques to control their heart rate and adrenaline response. A surge of adrenaline when you hit a miracle card can cause your pupils to dilate or your breathing to quicken. These are involuntary physiological responses, but with extreme training, they can be dampened. They learn to detach their emotional state from the outcome of the hand. They are not thinking, "Oh my God, I'm going to win $1 million." They are thinking, "This is the optimal line to take with this hand in this situation." They transform a high-stakes gamble into a series of calculated, unemotional decisions. But this relentless stoicism isn't just a shield, it's also a weapon. By presenting a consistent, neutral baseline, any tiny deviation they do choose to make becomes magnified. If a player who has been a silent statue for 5 hours suddenly engages in a bit of friendly banter, you better believe every other pro at the table is sitting up and taking notice, trying to decipher the meaning behind this sudden break in character. They control the flow of information so completely that even their silence has weight and meaning. Creating a story through leveling is a brilliant offensive strategy. Erasing the story with the blank canvas is the ultimate defense. But these two strategies rely on manipulating the narrative you present to your opponent. What happens, though, when the most powerful psychological trick has nothing to do with the story you tell, and everything to do with exploiting the flawed way your opponent's brain is already wired to think? The next technique moves beyond the table talk and the physical tells, and it targets a deep-seated cognitive bias that affects nearly every decision we make, from buying a car to, it turns out, playing a hand of poker for $1 million. This is the anchoring bias, and it's the secret weapon behind one of the most powerful psychological tools in a professional poker player's arsenal. The art of manipulating bet sizes to control an opponent's perception of reality. Think about that car salesman again. He throws out a high number, the sticker price, let's say $35,000. That number is now stuck in your head. It's the anchor. Every negotiation, every offer is now mentally tethered to that initial figure. When he graciously agrees to knock off $5,000, Your brain doesn't register that you're paying 30,000. It registers that you're saving 5,000. The anchor has framed the entire interaction. You feel like you won, even if the car's true market value was only 27,000 to begin with. At the poker table, the chips are the language and bet sizes are the grammar. A pro doesn't just bet to get value or to bluff. They bet to set anchors. They use bets to tell a story and, more importantly, to warp their opponent's ability to read that story correctly. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine the final table of a World Series of Poker Circuit event. The lights are hot, the cameras are silently gliding around the table, and the pressure is so thick you could cut it with a dinner knife. Our pro, let's call him the architect, is a quiet, methodical player in his late 40s. He's seen it all. Across from him is a young gun. A 23-year-old online prodigy we'll call the analyst. The analyst is a genius with numbers. He's memorized optimal game theory charts, he can calculate pot odds in a split second, and he lives and breathes statistics. He sees poker as a math problem to be solved. The architect sees it as a story to be told. The pot is already building. The blinds are high. The analyst looks down at his cards and sees ace-king of hearts, a monster hand. He puts in a standard, confident raise. The action folds around to the architect on the button, who looks at his cards almost dismissively. He has a mediocre-looking 9-10 of clubs, a hand with potential but nothing special. The architect doesn't re-raise. He doesn't fold. He just flat calls. This is the first, almost invisible anchor. It's a quiet statement. It says, "I'm not afraid of you, but I'm not overly strong either. I'm just curious." The dealer burns a card and lays out the flop. 8 of clubs, queen of hearts, jack of clubs. The analyst's mind races. He missed the flop completely. He has 2 overcards to the board and a backdoor flush draw, but right now his hand is just ace high. Still, he was the pre-flop aggressor. The textbook play is to make a continuation bet. To bet again to represent strength and try to take the pot down right there. He slides out a bet of 40,000 into the 75,000 pot. A perfectly standard, mathematically sound bet. Now all eyes are on the architect. He has a monster draw, an open-ended straight draw and a flush draw. He has a huge number of cards that can come on the next 2 streets to give him an unbeatable hand. The standard play here would be to either call and see the next card, or to raise big to put pressure on the analyst. The architect does neither. He calmly, almost delicately, pushes out a small stack of chips. It's a raise, but it's a tiny raise. He makes it just 80,000 to go. A min raise. The table goes quiet. The analyst freezes. This makes no sense. The math isn't adding up. If the architect had a strong hand like 2 pair or a set of 8s, he should be raising more to get value. If he was bluffing, he should be raising more to apply pressure. This tiny raise is weird. It's confusing. And that's the point. The architect has just dropped the first major anchor. He has anchored the price of continuing in the hand to a very small, very tempting number. The analyst is now trapped by his own logic. He has to call 40,000 more to win a pot that's now ballooned to almost 200,000. The pot odds are screaming at him to call. He thinks, he could be doing this with a draw. Or maybe he's just trying to confuse me. For this price, I have to see the next card. My ace or king could still be good. He calls. The architect has won the first battle. He controlled the price and kept his opponent in the hand, all while planting a seed of deep confusion. The dealer burns another card and lays down the turn. It's the 2 of diamonds, a complete brick. It helps nobody. The analyst, now completely unsure of where he stands, checks. The action is on the architect. And this is where he pulls the entire psychological framework apart. The pot stands at 235,000 chips. A normal bet would be somewhere around 120,000, maybe 150,000. Instead, the architect looks at his opponent, looks at the pot, and then shoves a massive tower of chips into the middle. A bet of 350,000. It's a colossal overbet. It's more than the entire pot. The analyst physically recoils. It's like he was expecting a tap on the shoulder and got hit with a sledgehammer instead. His brain is screaming. This is cognitive dissonance in its purest form. Just 1 street ago, his opponent was making tiny, tricky little bets. Now he's betting an amount that could cripple the analyst's stack. The anchor has been ripped up and thrown out the window. What does this bet mean? The analyst's logical mind scrambles for an answer. Did he have a monster on the flop and was slow playing me with that weird min raise? Is he bluffing now, trying to use a scary bet size to blow me off my hand? The story doesn't make any sense. The grammar is all wrong. The small bet on the flop and the gigantic bet on the turn are completely contradictory. They don't logically connect to any specific type of hand. And that is the entire point. The architect's goal wasn't to represent a hand. His goal was to break his opponent's decision-making process. By manipulating the anchors, setting a small, confusing one on the flop and then shattering it with a massive, terrifying one on the turn, he created pure psychological chaos. He took the math problem the analyst was trying to solve and scribbled all over it. The analyst is now lost. He can't trust his reads. He can't trust the numbers. All he feels is immense pressure and confusion. He looks at his ace-king, which is, in fact, the best hand at that moment. The architect still just has 9 high. But the cards don't matter anymore. This is a battle of wills. After several agonizing minutes, staring at the board, staring at the emotionless face of the architect, he folds. He slides his cards into the muck. The architect silently rakes in a massive pot, having never shown his cards. He didn't outplay the cards, he outplayed the human brain. He exploited a fundamental flaw in our cognition. Our tendency to latch onto the first piece of information we're given and our subsequent confusion when that information is violently contradicted. This is the third trick, anchor manipulation. It's a masterclass in psychological warfare, turning simple bets into powerful anchors of perception, only to shatter them to induce maximum confusion and force a critical error. This technique is used in almost every high-level negotiation on the planet. The first person to name a price in a business deal sets the anchor. A clothing store marks a jacket at $400 before putting it on sale for $200. You didn't just buy a $200 jacket. You feel like you saved $200. The value is perceived relative to the anchor. By understanding this, you can start to spot it, to question the initial numbers thrown your way, and to ask yourself, what is the true value here, independent of that first suggestion? Anchor manipulation is about controlling the numbers, about dictating the financial story of the hand. But what if a pro could control something even more fundamental? What if they could influence not just how you value a hand but how you remember it? The next technique is one of the most subtle and powerful in the entire poker arsenal. It's a form of psychological conditioning that happens over hours, sometimes even days, and it's designed to make you fold the winner and call with the loser, all while thinking it was your own brilliant idea. This devastating technique is what pros call strategic inconsistency, or more dramatically, the long con. It's not about a single hand. It's about weaving a narrative over dozens, even hundreds of hands, only to pull the rug out from under your opponent in the one pot that truly matters. It's the art of becoming predictable on purpose, just so you can become unpredictable when the stakes are highest. Think of it like a master storyteller setting up a character. For the first 2 acts of the movie, the hero is always kind, always turns the other cheek. You, the audience, learn this pattern. You expect it. Then, in the final act, when the villain pushes him one last time, the hero doesn't turn the other cheek. He responds with overwhelming, shocking force. The impact is 1,000 times greater because it shattered the pattern you were conditioned to expect. Pro poker players are directors of their own little table movies, and their opponents are the audience they're trying to fool. The most common version of this is setting up the big bluff. A pro might sit down at a World Series of Poker table in Las Vegas and spend the first 4 hours playing like an absolute rock. They fold everything but the most premium hands. They're patient. They're disciplined. When they do enter a pot and bet, they table the stone-cold nuts, the best possible hand. They show pocket aces. They show a full house. They show a flush. They are meticulously laying psychological breadcrumbs, teaching the table a simple lesson. When I put a lot of money in the pot, I have an unbeatable hand. Do not challenge me. Other players internalize this. Their brains create a shortcut. Player X bets big equals I fold. It's a survival mechanism. They've seen the evidence. They've been trained. For hours, the pro is just winning small pots, breaking even, maybe even losing a little. But they aren't playing for those small pots. They're investing. They are purchasing future credibility. Then the moment arrives. A massive pot is brewing. The board is scary with flush and straight possibilities everywhere. The pro is up against a single competent opponent who has been paying close attention all day. And the pro, holding absolute garbage, maybe 7 high, nothing at all, makes a massive table-shaking bet. Now what goes through the opponent's mind? Their hand is good, maybe 2 pair or a small flush. It's a strong hand that would normally be an easy call. But their brain doesn't just evaluate the hand. It pulls up the file it has been building on the pro for the last 4 hours. The file screams, "Warning! This player does not bluff. Every time they've made a bet this big, they've shown us the nuts. This is a trap." The ghost of all those previous hands haunts them. The story the pro has been telling is too compelling, too consistent. The opponent makes what they feel is a disciplined, smart fold, saving their chips. They nod, acknowledging the pro's strength. And the pro silently rakes in a monster pot with nothing, the payoff for hours of patient, calculated acting. They didn't outplay the opponent in that one hand. They outplayed them over the entire session. But this weapon is double-edged. The exact opposite scenario is just as powerful. A pro might cultivate an image of being a maniac. Wild, aggressive, and constantly bluffing. They'll play tons of hands, raise with questionable holdings, and get caught with their hand in the cookie jar a few times on purpose. They want the table to see them as a reckless gambler. They are conditioning their opponents to think, "This guy is always bluffing. He's trying to buy every pot. I just need to wait for a decent hand and call him down." The table grows frustrated. They start calling his bets with weaker and weaker hands, trying to be the hero who finally puts the maniac in his place. The pro loses some small and medium pots this way. It's the cost of doing business. They are, once again, purchasing an image. They are building a reputation for crying wolf. Then it happens. The pro looks down and sees pocket aces, the best starting hand in the game. The maniac, who has been bluffing all day, suddenly has an unbreakable monster. But does he slow down? Does he change his pattern? Absolutely not. He plays it exactly the same way he played his bluffs. He puts in a big raise. An opponent, holding a marginal hand like top pair, rolls their eyes. "Here we go again," they think. "I'm not letting him push me around this time." The opponent, completely conditioned by the pro's loose aggressive narrative, falls right into the trap. They re-raise. The pro re-raises again, going all in. The opponent, now convinced it's a battle of wills, a test of courage against a relentless bluffer, makes the call. They are so focused on the story of the maniac that they ignore the immediate danger signs. The cards are flipped, and the opponent sees the pocket aces. Their face drops. They've just paid off the one time the boy who cried wolf was actually telling the truth. The pro scoops a tournament-changing pot, not because of the cards he was dealt, but because of the story he told. Perhaps the most legendary example of this in U.S. tournament history is Chris Moneymaker's bluff of the century against Sammy Farha in the 2003 World Series of Poker main event. Moneymaker, an amateur accountant from Tennessee, was the ultimate underdog. He was playing against seasoned pros. Throughout the tournament, he had built a narrative, not of a rock or a maniac, but of a fearless amateur who wasn't afraid to gamble. In the crucial hand on a king-high board, Moneymaker had complete air, just a busted straight draw. Farha had top pair. The pot was already huge. On the final card, a blank, Moneymaker did the unthinkable. He shoved all in, putting Farha to a decision for his entire tournament life. Farha was tormented. The bet made no sense for a value hand, but it also made no sense as a bluff. Why would this amateur try to bluff a world-class pro for the championship? The story didn't add up. But the one consistent thread of Moneymaker's story throughout the event was his willingness to put it all on the line. He had broken the conventional patterns of play time and time again. This one final spectacular break from logic was consistent with his inconsistency. Farha, unable to reconcile the narrative, famously folded the best hand. Moneymaker won the pot with nothing, a move that propelled him to victory and ignited the global poker boom. He didn't just win with a bluff. He won with a perfectly timed, narrative-shattering play that cemented his legacy. So how do you defend against this? The key is to avoid getting locked into a static image of your opponent. You must constantly update your reads. A player who was tight an hour ago might have decided to switch gears. A player who was loose might be tightening up after losing a big pot. You have to fight the brain's natural tendency to create simple, unchanging labels. Ask yourself, is their action consistent with their recent pattern? If not, why? Is it a deliberate change in strategy? Or is it a reaction to a specific hand or situation? The best players are chameleons. Their patterns are fluid. To counter them, your perception must be just as fluid. You have to play against the player they are in this exact moment, not the player they were 3 hours ago. It requires immense mental focus, forcing you to recalibrate your assumptions on almost every single hand. It's exhausting, which is exactly why the long con is so effective. It preys not just on your perception, but on your mental endurance, waiting for that one moment of fatigue when you fall back on an old story and outdated assumption. And in that moment, the trap springs. And the most devastating traps aren't built with cards. They're built with feelings. This brings us to our fourth psychological weapon, a technique so subtle, so insidious, that its victims often help build their own cages. It's called the emotional anchor. This isn't just about putting a player on tilt. Any amateur can get lucky and frustrate an opponent. No, this is far more precise. The emotional anchor is the art of intentionally creating a specific emotional state in an opponent, and then linking that emotion to a specific action, a bet size, a gesture, a turn of phrase. It's classical conditioning at its most ruthless. Think of Pavlov's dogs, who were conditioned to salivate at the sound of a bell. In this version, the pro is the scientist, the opponent is the subject, and the bell is a stack of casino chips. Except instead of salivating, the opponent is conditioned to react with predictable rage, fear, or overconfidence. The goal is to bypass their rational mind entirely, to create a trigger that makes them feel first and think second. By the time their logical brain catches up, their chips are already in the middle of the table. To understand its power, let's go to the final table of a major US tournament. The lights are blinding, the cameras are everywhere, and millions of dollars hang in the balance. We have two players who are polar opposites. In one corner, we have a legend of the game, a man we'll call the architect. He's in his late 50s, wears a simple, unbranded baseball cap, and hasn't said more than 10 words all day. His face is a granite mask. In the other corner, we have the prodigy, a 22-year-old online superstar. He's brash, brilliant, and wears his emotions on his sleeve. He plays a hyper-aggressive style, and he despises being bluffed. To him, it's the ultimate sign of disrespect. The architect has been at this table for 8 hours. But for the first 6, he wasn't just playing cards. He was gathering data. He noticed that every time the prodigy got bluffed, even for a tiny pot, his posture would change. He'd sit up straighter, his jaw would clench, and he'd start staring daggers at his opponent. He couldn't let it go. It wasn't about the money, it was about the ego. So the architect began to set the anchor. An hour into the final table, in a completely insignificant hand, the architect is in the big blind. The prodigy raises from a late position. The architect calls. The flop comes down with 3 low, unconnected cards. The architect checks. The prodigy makes a standard continuation bet. Then the architect does something strange. He check raises, but it's a tiny amount. A min raise. It's a bet that, in theory, makes no logical sense. It's too small to be for value, and it's too small to be a credible bluff. The prodigy, confused but seeing no danger, calls. The turn card is a blank. The architect bets out again, another small, annoying amount. The prodigy, now visibly irritated, folds his hand. And then the architect does the most important thing. He turns over his cards, showing complete garbage. A 9-4 offsuit. He gives a slow, almost imperceptible nod, and rakes in the tiny pot. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't have to. The message is clear. I bluffed you and you couldn't do anything about it. The prodigy's jaw tightens. The anchor is beginning to set. 2 hours later, it happens again. A slightly bigger pot this time. The architect makes another strangely sized bet on the river. The prodigy thinks for a long time, his frustration palpable. He calls, only to see the architect turn over another winning bluff. The prodigy slams his water bottle on the table, just lightly, but the anger is simmering. The anchor is now firmly in place. The prodigy has now subconsciously linked the architect's weird, small bets with the intense feeling of being disrespected and outplayed. Fast forward another 3 hours. They are now heads up for the title. The stacks are deep. A monster pot is brewing. The prodigy has a monster hand. A set of jacks on a board with 2 hearts. He is almost certain he has the best hand. He bets big on the turn. The architect, after a long agonizing pause that seems to stretch for an eternity, doesn't fold. He doesn't call. He raises. And the raise is tiny. It's that same nonsensical, infuriatingly small raise from hours ago. In that instant, the prodigy's rational brain vaporizes. All the complex math, the hand range analysis, the years of training, it all vanishes, replaced by a single burning thought. Not again. You are not doing this to me again. He's not playing against the architect's hand anymore. He's fighting the memory of being disrespected. The bell has been rung. The emotional response is automatic. He sees the architect's granite face and imagines him holding another 9-4. ready to show it to the world and embarrass him on the biggest stage of his life. Blinded by ego and a thirst for revenge, the prodigy announces, "All in." He shoves his entire mountain of chips into the middle. The architect doesn't flinch. There's no hesitation. He calls so fast his chips barely make a sound. He turns over his cards. It's not a bluff. It's not 9-4. It's the one hand that beats a set of jacks. It's a flopped flush. He had the winning hand the entire time. The trap he set 6 hours ago with a tiny meaningless pot just won him the championship. He didn't just outplay the prodigy's cards. He outplayed his emotions. He found the trigger, conditioned the response, and fired the weapon at the perfect moment. That is the devastating power of the emotional anchor. So how do the pros build this? It's a 3-step process. First is observation. They become emotional detectives, profiling their opponents. What makes them tick? Is it ego? Do they hate being bluffed? Is it fear? Do they crumble under pressure? Is it impatience? Do they get antsy during long hands? Every player has an emotional vulnerability, a crack in their armor. The pro's job is to find it. Second is conditioning. This is the investment phase. The pro creates the link between an action and an emotion. They might use a specific bet size like the architect did. Or it could be a physical tell. Maybe they only stare down an opponent when they're bluffing in small pots. Or they might use language saying something like, "just a feeling." Every time they make a small speculative call, conditioning the opponent to associate that phrase with weakness. They do this repeatedly in low-stakes situations where it costs them very little. They are training their opponent how to react. Third and finally is exploitation. When the stakes are highest and a crucial decision needs to be made, the pro deploys the trigger. They make that specific bet. They give that specific stare. They say that specific phrase. And they watch as their carefully conditioned opponent bypasses logic and makes a predictable, emotional decision that benefits them. It's a terrifyingly effective technique. So how on earth do you defend against it? The defense is as mental as the attack. The number one tool is emotional self-awareness. You have to learn to perform a constant diagnostic on yourself. Ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? Am I angry? Am I scared? Am I overconfident? And most importantly, why am I feeling this way? By simply identifying the emotion, you begin to rob it of its power. You move from being a passenger on an emotional roller coaster to being the operator who can see the tracks ahead. The second defense is to reframe the question. When your opponent makes a bet, your first instinct is to ask, what does he have? To defend against an emotional anchor, you must ask a different question. What is he trying to make me feel? Is this bet size to make me feel scared? Is it meant to make me feel angry and disrespected? Is it designed to make me feel overconfident and reckless? Shifting your analysis from their cards to their intent can snap you out of the emotional trance. You realize you're not just in a card game, you're in a psychological one. Finally, you need a mental reset button. Between hands, especially emotionally charged ones, you must have a ritual. Take a deep breath. Take a sip of water. Stand up and stretch for 5 seconds. Look away from the table and focus on an object across the room. This creates a mental fire break, preventing the frustration or euphoria from one hand from bleeding into the next. It ensures that each decision is made with a clear head, free from the echoes of the past. The emotional anchor shows us that at the highest levels, poker isn't about controlling the cards. It's about controlling the emotional reality of the person sitting across from you. But what if a player could go even further? What if they could control the reality of the entire table? What if they could use not just one opponent's perception, but everyone's to construct the ultimate illusion? That brings us to the fifth and final technique, a masterclass in social manipulation that separates the legends from the mere professionals. This fifth technique is called table image metagaming. It's not a single move or a one-time bluff. It's a long con. It's the art of building a character, a complete persona at the table over hours, or even days, and then using that character's reputation as your most powerful weapon. It's about making your opponent so certain of who you are that they cannot possibly conceive you could be anything else. Think of it like an actor immersing themselves in a role. For this to work, the pro has to commit fully. There are 3 classic archetypes they might build. First, there's the rock, or the nit. This player is the epitome of caution. They play almost no hands. They sit there hour after hour folding. They make a statue look impulsive. They are broadcasting a very clear message to the table. I am risk-averse. I only enter a pot when my hand is so strong it could crack walnuts. The rest of the table quickly learns this. They see him fold pocket nines pre-flop. They see him fold top pair on the flop to a single bet. The story becomes ingrained. This guy waits for pocket aces and nothing less. Then there's the opposite, the maniac or the loose aggressive player. This person is a whirlwind of chaos. They're in every pot betting, raising, re-raising. They seem to be playing with pure, unadulterated gamble. They'll show down a bluff with a 7-3 offsuit. They'll 3-bet with a 9-4. Their message is, I am unpredictable, I am fearless, and I am probably bluffing. The table starts to see them as a human ATM machine, convinced that if they just call them down with a decent hand, they'll eventually get all their chips. Finally, you have the tricky wizard. This player is a ghost in the machine. They make plays that defy standard logic. They'll check raise with the strongest possible hand, a play usually reserved for bluffs. They'll just flat call with pocket kings pretending to be weak. Their goal is to create maximum confusion, to make it impossible for anyone to put them on a specific hand. Their message is, you have no idea what I'm doing, and neither do I maybe. Now here's the devastatingly brilliant part. The construction of this image is just Act 1. The real magic happens in Act 2. The pivot. After hours of meticulously crafting this persona, when the pot is huge and the pressure is at its peak, the player does the exact opposite of what everyone expects. The rock who hasn't played a hand in 2 hours, who everyone believes is tighter than a submarine hatch, suddenly executes a stone-cold, massive bluff for his entire stack. His opponents look at him. They look at their own strong but not unbeatable hand, and their brains short-circuit. Every piece of data they have gathered on this player for the last 5 hours screams that he has an unshakable monster hand. It is psychologically almost impossible for them to call. They fold, and the rock drags a pot he had absolutely no business winning. The maniac, who has been bluffing and splashing chips around all night, finally looks down and sees pocket aces. He goes through his usual routine, making a wild, oversized bet. The table size rolls its eyes and thinks, here we go again. Someone with a pretty good hand like 2 pair decides this is the time to be a hero and call him down. They push all their chips in, confident they've caught the bluffer, only to see him turn over the best possible hand. The maniac's reputation for crying wolf allowed him to get maximum value when he finally found the beast. This isn't just theory. Let's look at a case study from the high-stakes tournament circuit in Las Vegas. Picture the final table. The lights are bright, the cameras are rolling, and millions of dollars hang in the balance. One player, let's call him Marcus, has cultivated the most extreme rock image imaginable over the course of 3 days. The commentators have nicknamed him the Ghost because he's barely involved. He's folded his way to the final table, outlasting more aggressive players but accumulating a relatively small stack of chips. His opponents have completely written him off as a non-threat. He's just trying to move up the payout ladder by not busting. He's furniture. For 2 hours at this final table, Marcus continues the act. He folds ace-queen. He folds pocket tens. He's playing so tight he's practically suffocating. His chip stack is dwindling. He looks like a man on the verge of being eliminated. The chip leader at the table is a young, hyper-aggressive online pro who has been relentlessly bullying everyone, especially Marcus, stealing his blinds with impunity. The narrative is set. Then the hand happens. The aggressive chip leader makes his standard raise from the button. The small blind folds. The action is on Marcus in the big blind. The cameras zoom in on his face. He peels his cards back one at a time. He's holding the 7 of clubs and the 2 of spades. Statistically, the single worst starting hand in Texas Holdem. It's a hand you fold 100% of the time. It's garbage. Marcus pauses. This is a longer pause than usual. The table notices. The chip leader leans forward. Marcus looks at his chips. Then he looks at the chip leader, making direct eye contact for the first time all night. In a calm, steady voice he announces, I'm all in. The entire room goes silent. The commentators are flabbergasted. The aggressive pro's confident smirk vanishes, replaced by a look of pure confusion. His mind is racing, trying to process this impossible event. It's Marcus, his brain tells him. The ghost. The rock. The man who folds everything. For him to risk his entire tournament life like this, he must have pocket aces. It's the only hand that makes sense. It's the only thing that fits the story. The pro has a very strong hand himself, let's say ace-king. a hand he would normally snap call with against anyone else. But this isn't anyone else. This is Marcus. He has spent 3 days watching Marcus play with zero deviation from his ultra-conservative style. To call here would be to bet against every piece of evidence he has. It would be an act of insanity. He's being psychologically checkmated. After several minutes of agonizing, he shakes his head and slides his cards into the muck. He folds. Marcus, without showing his worthless 7 deuce, quietly rakes in the massive pot, doubling his stack and becoming a major contender without ever needing to have a real hand. He didn't just play his cards, he played his reputation. He weaponized the story everyone else had written about him. This is a masterclass in exploiting cognitive bias. He used his opponent's own pattern recognition against them. The human brain is hardwired to find patterns to predict the future and reduce uncertainty. Marcus created an incredibly simple, reliable pattern: fold, 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 bet only with a monster hand. When he finally broke that pattern, the break was so jarring, so out of character, that his opponents couldn't interpret it as a lie. They interpreted it as the ultimate truth. He leveraged their confirmation bias. They saw what they expected to see, and used it as the perfect camouflage for the perfect crime. Winning with a 7 deuce by playing the man, not the cards, is the pinnacle of poker psychology. But these 5 tricks, as powerful as they are just tools. They are useless without the foundational mindset, the mental operating system that allows a player to wield them under unimaginable pressure. What is this core framework? It's a concept known as thinking in ranges, and it fundamentally changes how you see not just the game but every decision you make. It's the difference between looking at a single tree and seeing the entire forest. Amateurs get obsessed with the tree. They sit there staring at their opponent, and the only question in their mind is, what 2 cards does he have? Is it ace-king? Is it a pair of tens? They're trying to pinpoint one exact hand out of 1,326 possible starting combinations. It's like trying to guess the exact number of grains of sand in someone's hand. You might get lucky once in a blue moon, but it's a losing strategy. A professional poker player never asks, what hand do they have? They ask, what hands could they have? This is the essence of thinking in ranges. A range is the entire spectrum of possible hands an opponent could be holding, given their position, their past actions, and their playing style. It's not a guess. It's a logical deduction. It's a fluid, evolving cloud of probabilities that shifts with every single action at the table. Think of it like being a detective at a crime scene. A rookie detective might find one clue, a footprint, and immediately decide who the suspect is. They'll develop tunnel vision, ignoring all other evidence, trying to make everything fit their initial theory. But a master detective? They don't look for a single suspect. They build a list of potential suspects. The footprint, the time of the crime, the missing item. Every piece of evidence doesn't point to one person. Instead, it narrows down the list. It eliminates some suspects and increases the likelihood of others. That list of suspects is the range. This shift from what hand to what range is the most profound psychological leap a player can make. Why? Because it detaches your decision-making from the emotional need to be right. When you try to guess a specific hand and you're wrong, it feels like a personal failure. You think, I'm a terrible reader, I got outplayed, I'm an idiot. That feeling is the gateway to tilt, the destructive emotional state where you start making bad decisions to try and win back what you lost. But when you think in ranges, you insulate yourself from that. You can make the mathematically and strategically correct play against your opponent's entire range of possibilities and still lose the hand. And that's okay, because you know that the one specific hand they showed up with was on the far, unlikely edge of their range. You accept it as variance. You didn't make a mistake. You just encountered a low probability outcome. By focusing on the quality of your decision-making process against their entire range, you free yourself to play consistently, logically, and without emotion, hand after hand, hour after hour. So how do they build this range in their mind? It starts before any cards are even seen. Let's say a player known for being extremely conservative and cautious raises from an early position at the table. Immediately, a pro isn't thinking about a specific hand. They're assigning a pre-flop range. For a player like that, in that position, the range is incredibly narrow and strong. It's probably only the absolute premium hands. Pocket aces, kings, queens, jacks, and maybe ace-king. That's it. They're not raising there with the 7-5 of clubs. So, from the very first action, the pro has already narrowed down 1,326 possible hands to maybe 5 or 6. Now the flop comes down. Ace of spades, 10 of hearts, 2 of diamonds. Our conservative player makes a bet. What does this do to his range? The detective just found another clue. We can now reevaluate. Does he still have pocket kings? Maybe, but he'd be worried about that ace. Does he still have pocket queens or jacks? It's becoming less likely he'd bet so confidently. But the hands in his range that contain an ace, pocket aces and ace-king, just became incredibly strong. So his action of betting has now weighted his range heavily toward a strong ace. Let's say we call his bet. The turn is a 4 of clubs. Now he bets again, a much larger bet this time. The story he's telling is one of immense strength. The list of suspects is shrinking. At this point, a pro might almost completely discount pocket kings or queens. The story just doesn't fit the evidence. The evidence, the big bet on the turn, points overwhelmingly to a monster hand, most likely ace-king or pocket aces. We are using every single action he takes to refine and narrow his range until it becomes a crystal-clear picture of what he is trying to represent. But here's where it transforms from a defensive tool into a devastating offensive weapon. The best players in the world aren't just figuring out their opponent's range. They are masters at manipulating what their opponents think their range is. Let's flip the script. Imagine a world-class pro is the one who raised from early position. They want their opponent to think they have that same narrow range of aces, kings, and queens. The flop comes ace-10-2. The pro has complete garbage, say a 7-8 of clubs. They miss completely. But they know what their opponent thinks they have. They know their opponent is looking at that ace and thinking, he raised from early position, of course he has an ace. So the pro bets. They are representing a hand that fits perfectly into the range their opponent has already assigned to them. They are telling a believable story. The opponent, holding a decent hand like pocket nines, now faces an impossible decision. He's not playing against 7-8 of clubs. He's playing against the ghost of pocket aces. More often than not, he'll fold the best hand, completely terrorized by a range that doesn't even exist. This is the heart of a sophisticated bluff. It's not just random aggression. It's a calculated narrative. It's about understanding the range you appear to have, and then making plays that are consistent with the strongest parts of that range, whether you have it or not. Consider a legendary hand from a high-stakes cash game involving the phenom Tom Dwan. The board was complex, with multiple flush and straight possibilities. On the final card, the river, his opponent made a huge bet, representing a flush or a full house, the nuts. Dwan held only 2 pair, a hand that could be beaten by many others. An amateur would think, does he have it or not? And flip a coin. Dwan went into the tank. He wasn't guessing. He was replaying the entire hand in his head, analyzing every action his opponent had taken. He was deconstructing his opponent's range. He thought about the hands his opponent would have raised with before the flop. He thought about which of those hands would have called the flop. He thought about which of those hands would have then bet the turn. And finally, which of that tiny remaining group of hands would make a giant bet on the river. He logically concluded that the number of bluff hands in his opponent's range, like busted draws, was actually larger than the number of value hands, the monster hands. He wasn't 100% sure. He didn't have a magical soul read. He simply calculated that based on the story his opponent had told, it was more likely a bluff than not. He made the call. A call for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and was right. His opponent had nothing. That wasn't a guess. It was the result of a rigorous, logical process of range analysis under extreme pressure. Thinking in ranges is the mental architecture that prevents a player from being psychologically broken by the game's uncertainty. It turns a chaotic guessing game into a structured, logical exercise. It's the operating system that runs every other piece of software, the bluffs, the value bets, the hero calls. It's the cold, hard processor running in the background, calculating probabilities and making optimal decisions. But what happens when logic isn't enough? What happens when you're head-to-head, staring into another player's soul, and the entire tournament comes down to one moment of pure human intuition? This brings us to the final, and perhaps most mysterious psychological weapon in a pro's arsenal. It's a concept some players call soul reading, but a more accurate term is weaponized empathy. This isn't about psychic powers or supernatural insight. It's the culmination of every other trick we've discussed. The final breathtaking leap from calculated logic to pure, distilled intuition. It's the ability to absorb thousands of data points in real time, betting patterns, subtle shifts in posture, the rhythm of an opponent's breathing, the story they've told over hours or even days, and synthesize it all into a single gut-wrenching decision that defies simple explanation. It's feeling, not just thinking, what your opponent is going to do. And there is no greater case study in the history of US tournament poker for this than the single hand that ignited a global phenomenon. The year is 2003. The place Binion's Horseshoe in Las Vegas. The final table of the World Series of Poker main event. Heads up for the championship bracelet and $2.5 million. On one side you have Sammy Farha, a seasoned high-stakes professional. He's cool, confident, with an unlit cigarette dangling from his lips, the very picture of a poker veteran. On the other side you have Chris Moneymaker, an amateur accountant from Tennessee who won his seat into the tournament through a $86 online satellite. He's the ultimate underdog, an everyman living a fantasy. The entire poker world assumes Farha will make quick work of him, but Moneymaker has been playing with an uncanny mix of aggression and instinct. The final hand begins innocently enough. The board shows a jack, a 5, a 4, and an 8. There are 2 spades on the board, meaning a flush is possible. Farha, holding a pair of jacks, has a monster hand, 3 of a kind. He bets. Moneymaker, holding just king high, a complete bluff with no pair, no draw, nothing, calls. The tension is already thick enough to cut with a knife. The dealer turns over the final card. It's a deuce of clubs. A brick. It changes nothing. Farha's 3 jacks are still almost certainly the best hand. Sammy Farha, the pro, checks. He's trying to trap the amateur, hoping Moneymaker will bet so he can pounce. But Moneymaker doesn't just bet. He looks across the table, takes a deep breath, and announces the 2 words that would echo through poker history. All in. He pushes his entire mountain of chips into the middle. The pot swells to an astronomical size. The championship is on the line. Now let's pause and enter the psychological arena. From a purely logical, mathematical standpoint, Moneymaker's play is madness. He is representing an incredibly narrow range of hands. A straight? A flush? A full house? It's possible, but unlikely given the action. Farha knows this. He has a powerhouse hand. Calling is the standard logical play. And yet, he hesitates. This is where weaponized empathy comes into play, but from Moneymaker's side. He wasn't just randomly bluffing. He had spent hours at the table with Farha. He had observed his patterns. He understood Farha's old-school professional mindset. A pro like Farha wouldn't expect an amateur to make such a gutsy, seemingly insane bluff for the world title. The sheer audacity of the move created a story that was, in its own way, believable. The story wasn't, "I have a good hand." The story was, no sane amateur would ever risk everything right here unless they had the absolute nuts. Moneymaker projected an aura of unshakable confidence. He sat there still as a statue while Farha agonized. Farha started talking, trying to pry information. "You got a pair of 5s? A pair of 4s? He asks, probing. Moneymaker says nothing. His silence is a weapon. His stillness is a fortress. He is giving away zero information, forcing Farha to rely entirely on his own read. And what is Farha seeing? He sees an accountant, an amateur, who has been playing fearless poker all day. He sees a man who just pushed all his chips in on a terrifying board. Moneymaker's entire narrative, the online qualifier, the everyman hero, works in his favor. It makes him unpredictable. Farha is a professional who plays against other professionals. He understands their logic. He doesn't understand this guy. The risk of calling and being wrong, of losing the world championship to a bluff from an amateur, becomes a psychological weight too heavy to bear. After a long, painful deliberation, Farha looks at Moneymaker and says, "You must have had this straight." He folds his 3 jacks face up on the table. The crowd erupts. Chris Moneymaker, the accountant from Tennessee, had just pulled off arguably the greatest bluff in poker history to win the World Series of Poker. He didn't win with cards. He won with a story. He won with a deep, intuitive understanding of what his specific opponent, in that specific moment, could be made to believe. He weaponized Farha's own logic and professionalism against him. So how do you develop this almost mystical skill? It's not about learning a trick. It's about changing how you perceive human interaction. First, you must become a world-class observer. Stop focusing only on your own cards, your own strategy. Watch everything. How does a player react when they get a good hand versus a bad one? Not just the obvious tells, but the micro-expressions. The slight tensing of a jaw. The way their focus shifts. Do this for hours and you'll start to build a subconscious database of their behavior. Second, practice active empathy. Don't just try to figure out what hand they have. Try to figure out who they are. Are they a risk taker or are they conservative? Are they playing with scared money or are they reckless? What story are they trying to tell you with their bets? Put yourself in their shoes. If you were them, with their personality, with their chip stack in this exact situation, what would you be feeling? Fear? Confidence? Confusion? Once you can start to accurately feel what they're feeling, you can predict their actions with stunning accuracy. This final trick, this intuitive leap, is the glue that holds all the others together. You can't just use one of these psychological tools in isolation. They are all interconnected. The leveling war is your intellectual framework. The time tell is your control over tempo. The verbal landmine is your direct line of psychological attack. The image projection is the character you play. And weaponized empathy is the director's cut. The final intuitive decision that brings the entire performance together into a winning masterpiece. Poker at its highest level transcends being a simple game of cards and math. It becomes a laboratory for the human condition. It's a place where greed, fear, ego, and courage are all laid bare on the felt. The pros who dominate US tournaments aren't just better card players. They are masters of human psychology. They understand that they aren't playing the cards. They're playing the person sitting across from them. They know how to build a narrative, exploit cognitive biases, and navigate the treacherous waters of another person's mind. The skills learned at the poker table, the deep observation, the strategic thinking, the control over one's own emotions, and the empathetic understanding of others, have applications far beyond the casino floor. It's the art of negotiation, the science of influence, and the practice of reading the unwritten signals people send out every single day. By understanding these tricks, you not only get a glimpse into the mind of a professional poker player, but you also gain a more profound understanding of the hidden psychological currents that govern all of our interactions. And that is a powerful insight no matter what game you're playing.